It's often said that money can reveal the darker sides of people, and I experienced this firsthand. My sister-in-law, Abigail, changed when she learned about my substantial inheritance. I had chosen not to broadcast this financial windfall as it was a private matter, but perhaps my husband Eric or his brother Jonathan mentioned it to her inadvertently. I can't fault them. After all, there were subtle changes in how Eric and I were living, which might have sparked Abigail's curiosity. Although I didn't want my wealth to be public knowledge, I didn't expect Eric or Jonathan to conceal the truth from their sister. I assumed it wouldn't concern Abigail since it was none of her business. However, that's when the trouble began. One day, Abigail unexpectedly showed up at our home commenting, "I heard you received a large inheritance, Susan. You're so fortunate to be able to afford such luxuries so easily." I replied, "It's not about luck, Abigail. I lost a loved one to gain this, and I would gladly trade the money to have them back. It's crucial to remember where our fortunes come from and to consider sharing with family." However, Abigail was not merely making conversation. She had an agenda. Without any hint of my growing unease, she continued, "I was hoping you might help me with my rent occasionally. Things have been tough since my second child was born, and any assistance would be greatly appreciated." Her words took me aback. "Abigail, why don't you seek employment to support your family? We can't provide for you indefinitely." "How can you say that, Eric?" she retorted. "I deserve some help from my family. I prefer to stay home with my kids rather than work a minimum wage job, especially when my sister-in-law is wealthy. You'll help me out for the kids' sake, right? They need a stable home." Abigail knew how to tug at our heartstrings, using her children to appeal to our sympathies. But the situation was more complex than she made it seem, and her approach left me both frustrated and saddened. When Abigail began using her children as a bargaining tool, it understandably infuriated Eric. To a certain extent, Abigail had always been dependent on others. She had never worked, relying entirely on her parents until they passed away. Now she turned to Eric and his brother Jonathan for financial support. They did help, but their assistance was intended solely for the benefit of the children. Abigail, however, used her children's plight to manipulate emotions and gain sympathy, a tactic she now employed with me, and, embarrassingly, it succeeded. I found myself agreeing to pay half of her rent, hoping it would put an end to her requests. Unfortunately, I was mistaken. This agreement only seemed to ignite Abigail's greed for more. She frequently asked for money or insisted we cover other expenses, claiming it was all for the children. Eric and I grew weary of her relentless demands, feeling exploited, yet hesitant to refuse because of the kids. Despite sensing that I was being taken advantage of, I avoided confronting the issue to prevent further conflict. However, I soon realized that I should have set boundaries with Abigail much earlier. The situation escalated when she began nagging me to fund a vacation to a costly tourist-popular city. She was persistent, but I stood firm, insisting that a luxury trip was neither essential nor a reasonable request. Abigail was displeased, but eventually stopped pestering me about it. For a brief moment, things seemed to return to normal, until a particular lunch date with her. During lunch, Abigail offered to pay and took my credit card to the counter. She was away for quite some time, but I thought little of it. It wasn't until the next day that I discovered a shocking $45,000 charge on my card. Panicked, I called Eric, who was as clueless and concerned as I was. I then reached out to Jonathan, who worked at a bank and could perhaps shed some light on the situation. After explaining the circumstances of our lunch, Jonathan's question hit me hard. "Did you give Abigail your card recently?" It was then that I began to piece together the extent of Abigail's deception and the real trouble I was facing. I handed my credit card to Abigail so she could pay for our lunch, but I soon found myself in a conversation I never anticipated. I expressed my suspicions to Jonathan, Do you think Abigail might have made some unauthorized transactions? To which he responded with unsettling certainty, I don't just think it, Susan. I know she did. She even mentioned planning to use your money for her vacation. This revelation was a complete shock. I urged Jonathan to send me my bank statements to see the full extent of the damage. As I feared, there it was. A hefty charge for a vacation booked just 3 weeks ahead. I immediately called Abigail, needing her to confess. Abigail, you need to be honest with me. Did you use my card for anything other than our lunch bill? After a brief pause, she admitted, Yes, I booked a few things. Remember that trip I wanted? I went ahead and booked it. I was stunned. Wait a minute, Abigail. Are you saying you used my card to book yourself a vacation without my permission? Yes, Susan, she replied, almost too casually. I've been planning this for a while and finally saw my chance. The kids will love it. I was furious, This is insane, Abigail. You can't just take my card and book whatever you want. That's theft. That's illegal. Oh, please, she scoffed. We're family and you have plenty of money. It's not a big deal. You should be happy for us. Absolutely not, Abigail. I won't let you go on a vacation with my money. Just because your family doesn't mean you get a free ride at my expense. I was appalled by her disregard for my autonomy and the casual manner in which she committed a clear crime. It was clear Abigail didn't grasp the severity of her actions, or perhaps she didn't care, thinking her familial ties would shield her from consequences. She was mistaken. I was determined not to let her misuse my resources without repercussions. I was about to demand she cancel everything when she smirked and challenged, What are you going to do about it, Susan? The trips are already booked. Her arrogance only fueled my resolve. There was no way I would allow her to enjoy a holiday funded by deceit. I was ready to take whatever steps necessary to rectify the situation and ensure Abigail faced the consequences of her actions. Abigail dared to say, It's all non-refundable, Susan. Even if you cancel, you won't get a single penny back. I couldn't believe it. What on earth, Abigail? You booked a non-refundable trip with my money? Are you out of your mind? Nope, I'm not insane. You should be thankful I got such a good deal, she replied, unabashed. Now that you can't cancel and get your money back, you might as well let me and my family enjoy it. We haven't had a nice trip in ages. Stop being so selfish with your money. If this had been any other situation, I might have admired Abigail's cunning, but her using her shrewd tactics to exploit me was infuriating. She was confident throughout our talk because she had cleverly ensured I couldn't interfere with her plans by choosing a non-refundable option. I was so close to losing my temper completely and lashing out at her. I even considered canceling everything right then and there, regardless of the cost, just to prove a point. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about her sense of entitlement and her dismissive attitude. However, canceling wouldn't solve anything. I knew it wouldn't deter Abigail and could even provoke further schemes from her end. I wasn't about to take a financial hit just to get back at her. Instead, I devised a different plan. Taking a deep breath, I spoke into the phone with feigned resignation. Fine then, Abigail. Since you've already booked a non-refundable vacation, there's nothing I can do. It seems you did manage to save money after all. Ah, I see you've come to your senses, Susan, Abigail gloated, thinking she had won. I'm glad you could look past your selfishness and let your family enjoy your wealth too. This makes you a bigger person. You might be right, Abigail. Thank you for teaching me such a valuable lesson, I replied, my voice dripping with sarcasm, though she didn't catch on. I'll be sure to return the favor when I have the chance. Oh, don't worry about that, she eagerly responded, already planning more. Maybe you can help me book another vacation next year. That would be the perfect way to thank me. The conversation was becoming unbearable. Even with a solid plan in mind, I had to end the call. I quickly said goodbye and hung up, spending the rest of the day fuming and plotting the perfect way to turn the tables on Abigail. She thought she could manipulate me into supporting her extravagant desires, but she was sorely mistaken. If she thought I was that generous, she had another thing coming. I've always believed in setting clear boundaries, but when Abigail crossed the line by stealing my credit card and showing utter disrespect and entitlement, I knew I had to act. She wasn't just being manipulative, she was acting criminally, and despite being family, I couldn't overlook her actions. When Eric came home that evening, I explained everything that had happened. He was stunned to hear about his sister's behavior and extremely concerned about the financial implications. Learning that Abigail, his sister, was behind this only intensified his anger. He couldn't hide his disappointment in her lack of remorse and her audacity to suggest she had done me a favor. "This is serious, Susan," Eric said, clearly upset. "I can't believe my sister would do something so reckless and entitled. I'm so sorry you're dragged into this because of my family." "It's not your fault, Eric," I reassured him, seeing his distress. "But I can't let Abigail enjoy this trip on my dime. It's just wrong. She intentionally booked a non-refundable vacation to make sure I couldn't cancel it. She's malicious, Eric, and I can't support her behavior. I've come up with a plan, but I'm not sure how you'll react since she's your sister." I hesitated, unsure if Eric would think I was going too far. But I knew I couldn't keep such important details from him, not wanting to cause any strain in our marriage. So I laid out my plan for him. To my surprise, Eric was supportive. He even found a hint of humor in the situation given the cleverness of the plan. "That is a brilliant plan, actually," he chuckled. "Remind me never to get on your bad side, my dear. You don't think it's too drastic?" "I'm really angry right now, so I might not be seeing things. You need to tell me if it's too much," I said, seeking his genuine opinion. "Maybe it is a bit much, but I don't care," Eric replied, his tone firm. "My sister deserves to face some consequences for her actions. She's been a scheming witch for too long. I'm fully on board with your plan." Eric's support was reassuring. It confirmed that we were on the same page and ready to ensure that Abigail would not get away with her manipulative tactics. Together, we were determined to see this through and make sure she learned a crucial lesson about respect and boundaries. Eric's suggestion caught me off guard. "Susan, I want to add something to your plan. Regardless of whether you go through with your revenge, you'll still lose a significant amount of money. That kind of money isn't trivial, and there's no reason you should just write it off. I think you should sue Abigail to reclaim what is rightfully yours." I was stunned. I had been anxious about how Eric might react to my plans for retribution, fearing it might upset him. But here he was, not just supporting me, but taking it a step further. This moment made me realize just how supportive my husband was, ready to stand by me even against his sister. Ladies, take note. Find someone who stands up for you like this. Eric truly showed his mettle that day, proving that he wouldn't tolerate anyone taking advantage of me. With Eric's encouragement, I felt empowered to proceed. There wasn't much preparation needed for the legal route. The evidence was already overwhelming. I informed Jonathan about our decision, and he supported it fully, amused by the twist. He even sent me screenshots of his conversation with Abigail, where she brazenly admitted to using my credit card to fund her vacation. Her lack of remorse and boastful attitude about her clever plan was damning. I forwarded these screenshots to my lawyer, but instructed them to hold off on starting the legal proceedings until Abigail was on her way to her dream vacation. She was too caught up in her plans, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing. She hadn't bothered to check in with me in the 3 weeks leading up to her departure. Meanwhile, I was busy at work and meticulously building my case. The day she boarded her plane marked the beginning of her reality check. It was the perfect moment to launch the lawsuit, catching her completely off guard while she was away and likely feeling most secure. This wasn't just about getting my money back anymore. It was about teaching Abigail a lesson in respect and boundaries, ensuring she understood the consequences of her actions. With everything in place, I was ready to see this through and make sure justice was served. When I set my revenge in motion, I knew it was only a matter of time before I would hear from Abigail. As expected, she called me frantic and on the verge of tears. "Susan, what is happening? The hotel just told us you canceled everything. Our shuttle was canceled too, and we had to rent a car. Now they're saying our booking was canceled this morning." "Yes, Abigail, the bookings were indeed canceled," I replied calmly. "What? You canceled everything? Why do you sound so unsurprised? Did you think I would let you go ahead with plans I never approved or made myself?" Abigail was silent for a moment, clearly trying to comprehend my words, but then her shock turned into anger, and she practically yelled at me. "What the hell, Susan? How could you do this to me? You need to fix this now and rebook the hotel we were supposed to stay at." "Oh, absolutely not, Abigail. And what would you do even if I rebooked? I've also canceled all the activities you planned, as well as your reservation at that expensive restaurant you were looking forward to tomorrow." "You canceled those too? How can you be so cruel, Susan? How could you do this to your own family? People who steal from me and act entitled about it don't qualify as my family. You've shown yourself to be nothing more than an entitled leech. I'm done being your ATM, especially after the blatant disrespect you've shown for my boundaries." Abigail threatened in response, "Just wait until I get back. I'm going to teach you a lesson. I'll call my brother. He'll put you in your place." "I'm just fulfilling the promises I made, Abigail. Go ahead and call your brother. See what he has to say. And by the way, I canceled your return tickets as well, so good luck coming back to teach me a lesson." Abigail continued to yell and hurl insults, but I was no longer willing to endure her vitriol. Exhausted and completely out of patience, I hung up on her. My focus was clear. I was done allowing her to use and manipulate me. The actions I took were severe, but necessary to protect my boundaries and demonstrate that her behavior was entirely unacceptable. I was almost certain that Abigail would try to manipulate Eric after our confrontation, but he was ready for her call and eager to set things straight with his entitled sister. I couldn't help but chuckle, imagining the shock on Abigail's face when Eric would firmly tell her off. It was a satisfying thought, knowing how she'd react to being firmly put in her place. Not long after, Abigail called me back, this time in tears, truly crying. Her earlier arrogance was gone, replaced by a pleading tone. "Susan, I am so sorry. I really should have asked for your permission before using your card. I just wanted a nice vacation for me and my family. I wasn't buying it. No, Abigail, you wanted a vacation for yourself on someone else's dime. You didn't even take the kids, so don't play the family card with me. I know I messed up. I have no excuses. I'm sorry, and it won't happen again. Please just rebook everything for me. We literally don't have the money to stay here." "You should have thought about that before booking a vacation you couldn't afford," I replied. "There's no way I'm helping you after the way you acted when I confronted you about stealing from me. But I already told you it was a mistake. Why are you being so difficult, Susan? If you had just helped me book a vacation since you have the money, I wouldn't have had to go behind your back. Abigail, I'm not obligated to finance your lifestyle, and you had no right to force me to pay for your luxuries. I already do enough for you and your kids. Say what you want, Abigail, it doesn't change the fact. And I'm sure by now you've realized that neither of your brothers are on your side." Indeed, Abigail had already reached out to her brothers, seeking sympathy and assistance, but to no avail. They held firm, reprimanding her before ending the calls. She was left with no support, which led her to desperately contact me again, still struggling to shed her entitled demeanor. However, nothing she said could sway me. I was resolute in my decision not to fund her any further. Her manipulation had reached its limit, and I was done enabling her behavior. When I made my position clear, Abigail finally realized that I was serious and attempted a different approach. She sounded resigned when she said, "Fine, you don't have to pay for my trip, but at least cover the cost for us to fly back. We can't even afford the return tickets. Please, Susan, don't leave us stranded." But I was resolute. "No, Abigail. Like I said, I'm not giving you another cent. How you manage to return is not my concern anymore. You can use those scheming skills of yours to figure out a solution. I will remember this, Susan. You're mocking me while I'm in a bad situation. I'll get back to you for this. This isn't over," she retorted bitterly. "No, Abigail, it's far from over. In fact, it's just beginning, but instead of plotting revenge, you should be more concerned about the lawsuit I filed against you today," I informed her, calm but firm. "What lawsuit? What are you talking about?" Abigail's voice was filled with panic. "Did you think I'd just absorb the financial loss from canceling a non-refundable trip? Of course not. So, your brother and I have decided to sue you for the money you cost us. You'll learn all the details once you manage to get back home. Bye for now," I concluded, hanging up as she began to yell again. Abigail was always good at making noise and concocting manipulative schemes. I was curious to see how she would navigate her way out of this predicament, but for my peace of mind, I decided to block her on my phone and all other communication platforms. Later, I learned that Eric and Jonathan had done the same. That evening, Jonathan came over, and we discussed the whole situation. We collectively decided that it was time to cut ties with Abigail. We had endured her toxic behavior and sense of entitlement for too long. From now on, we will stop all direct support to her. We agreed to help out with the kids to ensure they weren't kept away from us. But Abigail and her husband, who fully supported her actions, were no longer welcome in our lives. Abigail returned from her so-called dream vacation the next day. I wasn't sure where she stayed that night. My best guess was the airport. Eventually, one of her husband's friends helped them by lending money for their flights home. They tried to confront us at our house upon their return, but we turned them away. About 3 weeks later, Abigail came back, this time alone, pleading for me to drop the lawsuit. Her situation had grown even more dire, as her husband was now talking about divorce. It was clear that her actions had serious consequences, affecting not just her vacation plans but her entire family dynamic. Abigail's husband, overwhelmed by her reckless actions and their consequences, decided he couldn't bear the burden of her mistakes. Frustrated with her failed schemes and unwilling to face the impending legal challenges, he chose to distance himself and ended their marriage. As a result, Abigail found herself in a dire financial situation, unable to afford the costs of a divorce or defend herself in the lawsuit I had initiated. When Abigail came to me, seeking leniency, I remained firm. My decision was clear. I told her not to contact us again. The lawsuit proceeded, and Abigail narrowly escaped jail time. Instead, she was placed on a stringent repayment plan. Any failure to meet her payment obligations would risk imprisonment. The financial pressure forced her to find employment since the alimony she received from the divorce wasn't sufficient to cover all her expenses. Her husband gained full custody of their children and moved in with his mother, providing a stable home for them. Meanwhile, Abigail faced homelessness for a period after losing her house, partly because I had ceased assisting with her rent. Fortunately, my brother-in-law's mother is very cooperative, which means we still enjoy frequent visits with the children. Ultimately, I achieved the justice I sought, and I'm gradually recuperating the funds Abigail took from me. She now works at a job she dislikes, primarily to fulfill her repayment obligations. It seems Abigail's life will be challenging for some time, a stark reminder of the consequences of her actions and the importance of respecting others' boundaries and rights.